first thing Penelope Wilson had to do when she became the teacher of the little mountain school in Dry Cove was get used to being called Miss Penelope. The next and much harder job she was tasked with was learning the names, the faces, and the legions of young Tadlocks who attended the tiny schoolhouse. Penelope soon discovered, however, that most of the rising generation whose names she registered were the descendants of Grandpa Hap Tadlock, whose 2-story log house was the geographical, political, and religious hub of Dry Cove. Grandpa Tadlock and his aged wife were living their sunset years in unbroken calm. The hard toll of their youth and prime had bought them as much comfort as could be had in this mountain cove. All of their sons and daughters, with their families, they all lived with them in the valley and did the old man's bidding. Only one son, named Davy, the youngest and the most restless, had moved to North Carolina and settled on the Appalachia Creek in the shadow of the Great Smoky Mountains. The rest had remained to replenish the earth in the ancestral cove. Consequently, Penelope had just enrolled 5 lusty young Tadlocks, whom she learned to distinguish as Big Hamp, Little Hamp, Bill's Hamp, Luther's Hamp, and Wormy Hamp. After that, all went well. However, there was one little Tadlock whom Penelope discovered one day. Though his name wasn't on her school roll, nor would it ever be, she was assured that he could ever be on any school roll. For D Boone Tadlock, 8 years old, the youngest and the wide-eyed grandson of Grandpa Tadlock, knew the big world only as it peeped at him from the outside as he laid upon his pallet on the cabin floor, or perhaps from the sunny front porch on a pretty day. Old Doc Wheeler had long ago pronounced his verdict with a grave shaking of his head. His hip joints ain't made like they ought to be, and there ain't nary a thing we can do about it. But he'll never be able to walk. Now, D Boone, he knew that his poor twisted legs could never carry him through the gate and up the wooded ridge of Cattail Knob that walled in his narrow world. His deep brown eyes, though, they missed little of what came or went through the windows and the doors or the cracks in the chinking of the log walls. Penelope had loomed upon the lad's horizon soon after her arrival. Heck, she was the first foreigner he had ever known, and she came from a great city of fully 5,000 people that was inconceivably far away, 100 miles away, they say, and she was the graduate of a state college. But for all that she was cityfied and educated, folks soon found that she was just as common as a rail fence, and that was as fine as a compliment that anyone could ever pay you in Dry Cove. A day or so after Penelope's first visit to the crippled child, she made it convenient to pass Jake Tadlock's house, just when she knew that she would find Jake and Sarah, his wife, out on the milking lot. While Sarah milked, Penelope sat on a barrel, and she talked about little D Boone. "Oh, he's a wonderful child," she declared. "I've never seen a finer head or more intelligent eyes. You should certainly have him examined by a specialist. They're making remarkable cures of such cases nowadays. I want you to let me write a splendid doctor I know in Nashville and ask for his advice." A sudden gleam of hope landed in Sarah's eyes as she looked up from her milking cow. "Oh, Miss Penelope, do you reckon they could make him so he could walk? The good Lord knows how proud I'd be." Yet there was the faintest glimmer of animation in Jake's voice as he replied, "Much obliged, ma'am. It's kind of you to offer that. However, I'd do nothing without asking my pa, and I'll name it to him the first time he drops in." It just so happened that Penelope was making one of her frequent calls to see the young protege when the grandfather dropped in. The boy's father, Jake, came bluntly to the point. "Pa, Miss Penelope says that D Boone might get fixed up if we send him to one of those big city doctors out yonder. Me and Sarah's been talking it over, and we're might nigh on the notion, but I aim to ask you afore we done anything." "No." The grandfather spoke with one word, quietly, yet firmly. Penelope turned in amazement. "Why, Grandfather Tadlock, I was just sure you'd be so pleased. Everybody says D Boone is your favorite grandchild. You'll let him have this chance, won't you?" "No, ma'am, I'm against it." The old man's tone was courteous, but there was a ring of finality in it. "It ain't nary a bit of use. I've told Jake and Sarah time and time again, they won't never raise this one. It's the good Lord's doing, and what is, will be. That's scripture. Some folks are predestined to have sorrow and trouble, and we ain't got no right to complain." Deeply hurt, Penelope turned to the parents for backing and a further appeal. Jake's face was a mask, and Sarah's eyes were duller, and her voice more plaintive than usual as she weakly yielded to the grandfather's authority. "Yes, Paul, I reckon you're right. Folks in this day and time," the grandfather went on, "is getting so tarnation smart, they reckon they can go square in the face of God Almighty, just like them people in the good book that tried to build that tower up to heaven so they could sit up there and laugh at God if he sent another flood." Penelope would have given up the fight had it not been for the appealing look of the little crippled boy who was gazing at her as they pondered his fate in their hands. "Grandfather Tadlock," she pleaded, "when you're sick, you send for the doctor, and his child is just sick, and I'm almost sure that the doctors can cure him." "No, ma'am, this ain't no sickness. This boy was born that way, and if it's the Lord's will for him to grow stout, he'll get stout, and if it ain't, he won't." The case was settled, and that was clear enough. But every day or so, the busy schoolmistress of Dry Cove found time to drop in and chat and laugh for a while with the little shut-in boy. Daily, she came to comprehend the unconquerable courage of the lad, in whose fragile body beat a heart as stout and resolute as that of the pioneers that came before him. Daily, too, she came to realize how hopeless was her dream of winning for the child, his one chance for restoration. The boy's mother, Sarah, was a true daughter of the mountains, and the blood of the old Indian fighters flowed through her veins. The boy's father, Jake, he had the heart of a pioneer and an adventurer, but the code of the mountains held fast in him. "I've heeded the paw," he would say. "The old ones know best, and I'll be a grandsire some day, and I expect mine to do as I tell 'em." Penelope, however, refused to abandon hope. She wrote the forbidden letter to the specialist, and a week later she had a reply. It offered encouragement, but she kept it to herself. Her own faith in the predestined schedule of mundane haps and mishaps allowed for a wee bit of diplomacy by way of helping Providence out in a pinch. And Penelope was a diplomat. She knew that none of the usual feminine ways of scheming, argument, tears, and flattery would avail. That's right. Grandpa Tadlock was woman-proof. So, like a good general then, she decided to storm the grandfather's frowning fortress, just where he himself believed it to be absolutely impregnable, in the moated and bastioned gate of his rock-ribbed theology. Through the schoolhouse window, Penelope saw the grandfather riding past on his horse. Immediately, she fudged a little bit on the last spelling lesson of the day, and she dismissed school early. She found the old man at Jake's house, and after a cheery greeting, she suddenly asked, "Grandpa Tadlock, do you know a minister by the name of Tucker?" "Yes, ma'am, but he's a Methodist." There was obvious disparagement in the tone. "Well, he told me today that he was going to North Carolina to hold a revival on the Chattahoochee Creek." You don't say." "Well, I'm sorry, but I got a boy that lives up on the Chattahoochee." "Yes, I know that. And Brother Tucker told me he was going to look him up and try to get him interested in joining the Methodist meeting." "Well, that's what worries me, ma'am. Davy ain't well grounded and rooted in the faith, and I mistrust them Methodists. They're spreading their doctrines far and wide, and I'm uneasy that they'll get Davy's feet in the muddy clay." "That surely would be a pity," declared Penelope sympathetically. Now, the truth is that Penelope was a Methodist herself, but that damning fact hadn't come to light yet in Dry Cove. "It certainly looks," she went on soberly, "as though you might have a Methodist in your family soon." The old man's eyes flashed with indignation. "No, ma'am, I won't that. I tried to bring up my house in the ways of right, and I don't aim to see nary one of them turn out ornery." "That's a noble spirit for a father to have," replied Penelope encouragingly. "But I understand the Methodists are strong in Carolina." "Well, you just leave it to me. Me and my wife will go over there and we'll stay till Davy gets his feet planted on the rock. And I don't care if it takes all winter." Jake and Sarah gasped at the sudden decision, and Penelope lent her full moral support. "You're exactly right, Grandpa. What is to be, will be, and I believe that myself." The old man beamed upon her. "I'm proud you was raised up proper, Miss Penelope. Me and my wife is leaving tomorrow, and we'll stay there until corn planting time. The grandfather's leave with the crippling grandchild was, for him, unusually demonstrative. D Boone, your grandsire's going to be gone for a spell, and I hope you'll live and get stouter, if it's the Lord's will. And I'm going to bring your pretty back when I come back. Goodbye, honey. 2 evenings later, Penelope was again at Jake's house. The child had already been put to bed in the back room to dream of racing on flying feet and chasing bears and panthers. I keep thinking about the boy, Penelope led off in a persuasive way that she had. I'm convinced that the only thing getting in the way of him getting well is our failure to give him his chance. Oh, Miss Penelope, Sarah burst out passionately. Ever since you named it, I kept a-pondering it in my mind. It seems like it ain't human to let him just go on dragging himself through life like a wild animal in a steel trap. No, Sarah, Jake interrupted. There ain't no use in going through all that no more. Paul's against it, and I ain't going contrary to him. Penelope saw that both parents were deeply stirred. Even Jake, dry-eyed and steady-voiced as he was, had an unwanted sadness in his face. There remained but one obstacle, but it was as real and as formidable as the granite rib mountain looming over the cabin. There was a moment of silence. The lamplight was set aflicker by the blaze of the logs on the hearth, and the creaking of an inner door caused all of them to turn. Through the crack of the door, the face of the child stared up at him. "Why, D Boone, honey, where you going?" the mother chided. "We thought you was asleep an hour ago." "No, Ma, I heard Miss Penelope talking, and I wanted to hear what she was saying." A sudden inspiration came to Penelope. "Listen, Grandfather Tadlock is right. What is to be, will be. And I propose we leave it up to D Boone to settle the question himself. What do you want to do, dear, about going to see the city doctor? You've heard us talking about it, I know." Jake lifted the small child in his arms and brought him to the fireside. A light of surprise and understanding broke out in the boy's eyes. "Law, Miss Penelope, it's funny you asked me, but Lord knows I'd hate to go against Grandpap. But I sure do crave to get my legs fixed, if there's any way they could be. And I'd work hard, and I'd pay you the money back." It was more than the mother could stand. She wept openly and unashamed. Jake was fighting in the He-Man fashion, but he was having a hard time of it. And finally he spoke. "That settles it. If he wants it that bad, I give in. No different to what Paul says." It was corn planting time when Grandpa Tadlock, having seen Davy safely immersed in the waters of the Appalachia, they turned their faces back towards Dry Cove. And on the homeward journey, they stopped in Knoxville, where they made a mysterious purchase. It was something bulky, and it took 2 men to lift it in the burlap-lined crate. 2 days later, Luther Tadlock helped haul the crate to his father's house. The old man refused to satisfy everyone's idle curiosity on just exactly what it was. "It's just a doohickey to grind some smoke with," was all he'd say. The next day, the old couple came to Jake's house, riding the old farm wagon. The mysterious crate thing filled half the wagon bed. Jake came to the gate and he greeted the old folks and helped carry the crate to the porch. "Where's D Boone?" the grandfather asked. "Why, Penelope came by in her Ford and took him for a ride. They'll be back directly." "Well, that's good, Jake. I promised him a pretty when I come back, and I fetched it. We'll unwrap it afore he gets here. He'll open them big eyes of his when he sees it." Within minutes, Jake and Sarah, with Grandpa Tadlock, were gazing upon the polished wood, toughed upholstery, and the shiny metal fixtures of a thing whose likes had never been seen before in Dry Cove. There it was, the latest and most improved wheelchair. "Why, Paul, what in creation?" Jake gasped. "What you got to say about that?" the squire demanded with pride showing in his face. "Well, it's the prettiest thing I've ever laid my eyes on before, Paul," exclaimed Sarah with the eagerness of a child. "But, Paul, it's come too late to do D Boone any good." The old man's face clouded with distress. "Is that so, Sarah? Well, I'm awful sorry to hear it. I was hoping he'd get stout enough to roll himself about in it. But it's like I've told you. What is what will be, and we mustn't complain." "We ain't complaining, Paul," answered Sarah, half frightened. In that moment, a shiny Ford coupe came to a stop at the gate. Seeing his favorite grandson sitting in the car, the the grandfather ordered. "Get out there, Jake, and tote the little one up to the house." "Well, wait a minute, Pa," Jake answered quietly. The door of the car opened, and a small boy in knickers climbed out, a bit stiffly, and came walking with a slight limp up the steps. "Howdy, Grandma and Grandpa," he shouted as he waved his hands towards his grandmother. The grandmother let out a yell and flopped limply into a chair. "Oh, Lordy," she screamed. "For the love of God, Sarah, am I seeing a haint?" "Why, Granny, what ails you?" called the lad as he ran to her. "It's me. Ain't you going to say howdy?" "Get away! Don't touch me! It gives me the all-overs!" the old lady shouted hysterically. "Geraldine, calm yourself," Grandpa Tadlock commanded. "There ain't no sense in a female as old as you a talking that way. What's been going on here, Jake? What exactly has you and Sarah been and done?" Jake stammered in embarrassment. He had dreaded this moment for months. "Why, Pa, it was Miss Penelope. She asked the boy what he wanted to do. And he was so sot on going to the doctor that me and Sarah gave in. And he was gone 3 months. And when he came home, he could walk a teeny bit. And now, he's getting stouter every week. And up and gone the whole doggone day. And he's eating like a fattening hog." "Pa," Sarah broke in, trembling and smiling at the same time, "we sure hated to cross you. But we took a chance for him. Anyhow, you always said, 'What is to be, will be.' Miss Penelope said that too." The old man paused and took a plug of tobacco from his pocket and leisurely bit off a huge chew. "Well, Jake," he said firmly, "me and Miss Penelope was right, wasn't we? And I reckon we can trade this here wheelchair for a bicycle."